I want to start today's podcast with a comment that I got on a recent video. The comment says, where does verbal abuse tie into this? Like, I'm in a situation where my husband is tearing me down by telling me I'm a fool and a loser over and over again right now. I'm trying to set a boundary. And there's been many other things in the past. He's called me names. He sends your videos to me talking about my videos. Then what? I don't believe he sees my side. His name calling does hurt. And he says it's God's will to call me names. He uses God in it. Now, this video, the caption that I used was Proverbs 14:1, which is about a foolish woman tearing her home down with her own hands, and how you should be a woman who builds it up. And this is the video that I started off saying, have you ever wanted to square up with your husband, right? Like, very lighthearted, joking about wanting to fight your husband because you're at odds. And I go on to describe some things that, wives have a tendency to do, and how we should really stop doing those things. Now, I do want to read my reply to that comment because this was actually very disheartening. But I think I get a few of these comments every now and then, and I do want to make it known that I don't support that. But I also want to dive into why it's so important to seek God for yourself so that you are not deceived. So, what I said to her was, if he's verbally abusing you, that's wrong for many reasons, but particularly because it tears you down and doesn't allow you the space to be vulnerable and compassionate. And you don't have to accept that. The only thing I always say is check your heart posture and make sure you're not also participating in the verbal abuse or even provoking him to it. That's not to say you're responsible for his actions, because you are not. But imagine my child tells me someone hit her, and I later find out that she was teasing them. It's still wrong for the child to hit mine, but I now have to address my child's behavior too. And what I did there, I was just explaining how a lot of times we look at verbal abuse, and sometimes it really is just, this man is crazy and he's abusing me and I'm not provoking him. But there are times where, and I've addressed this before, where we talked about, oh, my husband is verbally abusive, but then we don't talk about the other side of how the wife is provoking this man, or she's also verbally abusive. And so the example that I gave with the child is, if my child comes home and says, hey, Jimmy hit me, my first instinct is going to be like, well, why did Jimmy hit my child? We need to go get this straightened out. Where's Jimmy? Where's his mom? Like, let's go talk about this, right? But when we get to the bottom of it, oh, Jimmy hit me after I said this to him, or after I did this to him. What happens there is, and this is the conversation, a lot of times we have very polarizing conversations online, and we don't dive into why. It's always, everybody plays a part in these things sometimes, right? And so when we get down to it, if I find out that my child provoked Jimmy, whether physically or verbally, then I now have to address that, because although Jimmy should have still practiced self-control and not put his hands on my child provoked Jimmy. Okay. And so that's why I share that part, because we have to be responsible for our own actions, and we have to also be responsible for the things that we are doing. So I went on to say, that's not to say you're responsible for his actions, because you are not. But imagine, so I read that part already, sorry. And I said, I'm not sure of what the nature of what he is saying to you, outside of her saying he's called her a loser. I'm not sure if it's any deeper than that or what is going on. And I said, there's no need to go into detail here, but verbal abuse shouldn't be taken lightly, because it can and sometimes does lead to more. It is not God's will to call you names, as that's what her husband said. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. None of that is reflecting of name calling. In these situations, you want to seek God for yourself in prayer and see what he reveals to you. As always, if things turns violent, do not stay in harm's way. That doesn't necessarily mean to divorce, but don't be prideful and stay in a home where you're being abused. There is no cut and dry response, because I don't have the full story, but I do want you to know I do not condone a man berating you and saying it is in the name of God, or knowingly harming you and sending you my videos to gaslight you into submission. Yes, God calls us out and expects us to operate on his standard, but God is not abusive, and that was never what submission was meant to be about. As a wife, you do your part and be responsible for your words and actions. But if your husband begins to initiate harm to you, you have a duty to ensure protection for yourself and children if you have any. I do want to emphasize, this is not about trying to change him, because you can't. It's about seeking God for yourself on what exactly to do. Continue to operate in prayer and fasting, but don't allow yourself to be gaslit. You don't have to argue any of these points with him. You pray for him and you pray for discernment, and you trust God to deliver you and to be obedient to what he says, even if it's not what you want to hear. So that was a little lengthy. That took like 5 minutes for me to explain that before we get into it. But this is just one of the many examples of why we as believers have to be so diligent in seeking God for ourselves. And I'm not at all saying people shouldn't ask me questions. I have an entire advice segment on my page where most of the questions I'm leading people back to the word and encouraging them to go back to God in prayer. I'm just giving the information that I know, the wisdom and understanding that I have, but I'm still always encouraging you to go back to Father, because what many of us don't realize is because we are so busy seeking that understanding from everyone else, people have motives. People have their own desires. In this case, arguably, I don't know for sure because I don't know the entire situation, but in this case, it sounds like her husband is very controlling and maybe even abusive, and he wants her to be under his dominion no matter what. He wants to act and behave in a way that he wants to act and behave, and he still expects her to be submitted to him, to be loyal, and to be loving. And a woman who doesn't know any better will do that. This is why women stay in abusive situations longer than they should. This is why women, even before they get married, this is why women keep coming back to the same men that are doing them wrong over and over again. It's because they're not leaning on the understanding of God. And so in this situation, what I'm not encouraging this woman to do is to divorce her husband. And again, the best way for me to explain what I'm trying to say is this is why it's important to seek closeness and connection with God, because it can be very easy to read my comment and be like, oh, go get a divorce. But I never said that, because even in this situation, a lot of people would say, oh, she needs to go divorce him. But does she, or does she just need to physically get herself out of harm's way, right? Does she need to get a divorce, or does she need to get on her knees and go to God in prayer? And this is the thing that makes you come off as a crazy person in our society, because we're very prideful and we're very protective of our own ego and our images and the way that we're perceived. And it's much harder to, be stoned or to have people say things about you or to not be accepted and to just keep going. But oftentimes that's what we have to do as believers. And in this situation, as a wife, like I said, it may not be, oh, let me go and get a divorce. It may be, I need to swallow my pride and go back home to my parents for a while. And I need to pray to God about this and see what he reveals to me. And if my husband self-destructs, if God tells me this man was going to kill, we have to seek God and not rely so much on worldly understanding in a lot of situations. And this happens very often. Another example was I made a video. And I want to make it clear, a lot of times when I make a video, I did another one about how we have to understand when something is a testimony and when something is a blueprint. And even when something is a blueprint, sometimes it's appropriate for you to just take the blueprint and go make it your own. But a lot of times people will take a testimony and they want to take the testimony and ask questions for themselves and try to make the testimony fit their life. And the example I gave in the video was this lady did a video. She was like, God paid my bills. And she was talking about how she had gotten laid off or fired, and she was just running through her savings, paying her bills. And all the while, she was still going to church. She was still tithing, paying her 10%. And it came to a point where she was getting down to like nothing. She had to stop paying things. I think she was behind on her rent. She was behind on her car note. She was racking up credit card debt. But she was still, praying, going to church, tithing, still operating in faith. And one day she put a prayer request in, like she wrote a prayer request, and she doesn't know what they do with the prayer request. She thought that like they keep them in a box and like, maybe they burn them at the end of the year or something. She didn't know what they do with them. But her pastor and first lady had actually read her request, and they decided as a church that they were going to bless her. And they paid her rent. They paid a lot of things for her. And I'm skipping over a lot of the details, but there's a YouTube video for it. And I was saying how people will listen to that testimony and they will start, what church is that? Where do you go to church? How much was your rent? What prayer did you pray? And I'm not saying that those are not good questions, but they're wildly inappropriate, because even if she tells you where she went to church, how much her rent was, what prayer she said, that's her testimony. A testimony is meant to give glory to God. That testimony was not really meant for you to be like, oh, let me see if the church will pay my rent too. The testimony was meant to restore your faith in God. Not even restore your faith, because you don't need anybody to restore your faith. It should always be there. But to strengthen your faith and to edify what God can do for other people, right? And that's an example of a testimony. A blueprint is like, hey, these are the things that I did to save my marriage, and I think every woman should know these things. And I give a list of 6 things, right? That's like a blueprint. But even in the blueprint, you take those 6 things and you make it fit to your family, because maybe you and your husband got married but you don't have children, and one of the 6 things I talk about is children. Instead of you being like, oh well, I don't have kids, nobody, like, okay, just take take what applies to you and leave what doesn't, right? And we have such a hard time with that. So the other video that I was going to explain was, I did a video on fasting. And this video on fasting, actually, I came from another video. So initially, before I did that video, I did a video that I was talking about how the enemy he's after your attention and you let him have it. And in that video, I talked briefly about fasting. And so I got quite a few questions about fasting, and somebody asked specifically, how do I fast for that long? Which I will say, when I first read the question, I'm like, well, that's subjective, right? And the short answer is, you fast for however long God tells you to fast, because like, as much as we like to say God knows my heart, he actually does know your heart. He knows your capabilities. He knows what you can and cannot do. If you are on medication, if you have all these things going on, God might not call you to a 3-day fast, but he also might, right? And that's the thing. So I made the video on how to fast, and I spoke on a few points, but then again, there were additional questions. And so what I find is, people are not very comfortable taking information and knowledge and then breaking it down. And I don't know if this has always been a problem, because this is my first time being an adult, and I am an adult in the age of technology. So I don't know if adults were doing the same type of things previously, but I do sometimes believe that technology cripples us. It cripples us into not wanting to seek God for the answers, right? And not wanting to be diligent. It makes us feel like everything has to be right now, right now, right now. And that's an example, actually, like the fasting is an example of what is like a blueprint and a testimony, where I'm telling you the power of a fast, and I'm telling you the benefits of a fast, and I'm telling you how to fast, right? And I did specifically say, I promise you, you won't die if you go 3 days without eating, because most of y'all ain't gonna die if you go 3 days without eating. You just feel like you're gonna die. You're gonna be all right, you know? And I talked about like my personal encounters with fasting, and how typically, you know, this is what I experience on this day, and this is when it gets hard, but then after that it's like smooth sailing. And funny enough, on the 3rd day for me, typically you feel like you can go longer once you get past the pangs and the mental hurt and the angst. And so I was talking about that, and I just realized with a lot of the comments, we have to get back to a place where we take things, we hear things, and we take it as, I wonder if that was something that God meant for me to hear today. I'm not going to ask this person any follow-up questions. I'm going to take this to God in prayer. I'm going to see what he says. And I think the problem with doing that, I will admit, is that God is not 911, where as soon as you get on your knees and start praying, the answer rains down from heaven. It doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the answer comes to you and there's a little while. Sometimes you hear nothing for a while. And I think this is where we build up our faith and our stamina as believers, when we realize, I'm not going to always get the answers right away. And so what? I still have to be obedient. So what? I still have to seek whatever it is that God has for me. So what? I still need to read my Bible. So what? I still need to pray. So what? I still need to fast. You might go on a fast for 3 days. And that's another thing. I talked about the fast, and, you know, somebody said something like, well, I fasted and nothing happened. Nothing happened physically, but maybe some boulders moved in the spirit. And I don't talk about like my experience with fasting. I don't talk about a lot of things. I will come and sit and share things, but there are a lot of things especially when it comes to God, that I just do not share. There are certain things that I will not share, do not share unless God calls me to share those things. And I think that that's healthy. And as much as I want to be there to help and support people, I am not the Messiah. You are not following me. And so in saying that, I hope that the things that I share, they spark conversation. And sometimes if God is leading you to conviction through those messages, it takes you to a point of godly sorrow, or even to a point of curiosity with God, where you go to him in prayer and understand that things don't always move in the way that you want them to. Because even the comment that was like, I fasted and nothing happened, I could see where it was well meaning, but it was also very strong. It came on very strong and almost very prideful. Like, I deserve for something to happen because I fasted. How dare nothing happen when I fasted? I'm never going to do this again. And I don't think people realize that fasting is just a spiritual practice. It's not you want the answer from God, so you go and fast. And then every time you want an answer from God, you fast. Sometimes you're just going to be fasting for spiritual stamina. Sometimes you're not fasting for an answer. And sometimes you are fasting for an answer. But God knows you want an answer, and God is God, and he knows what he's doing. But he also wants you to go through the process of just learning how to seek him. So you're going to have to keep fasting. You're going to have to keep fasting. You're going to have to keep fasting. And I think that the more we realize that people are vessels, people are mouthpieces for God, they are not the initial source. Because I'm not this wonderful, I am nothing. I am nothing. I am just a person. Anybody that you follow online, even when they have followings, even if they're teaching you something, even if, oh, that's a good word, they are giving you what God has put in their mouth, what God has placed on their heart. Glory be to God. And it's so hard to place that in the landscape of online space, because we get so much glory and accolade in this physical space of like commentary. And it reminds me too, there was somebody, I did a video, because y'all know I don't really have a niche. I just kind of talk about things that are real to me and that I know would benefit other people. And sometimes that's like talking about content, because I know that there are a lot more people that God has put words in your mouth, and he has put things on your heart. He's put skills and creativity and all kinds of things that can help people, but you're hiding and you're pretending like you don't know that that's the thing that you need to do. So I try to help people come out of their shell. And I got a comment one time when I was talking about how I grew on TikTok and how it wasn't just about the money. I was so amazed at all the other things that happened. One of the things, this podcast that I'm yapping on right now, right? But I was talking about how one of the benefits that I got from posting consistently on TikTok is it helped me to not feel so cringy to do other things. It essentially built up my confidence and my ability to speak, to advocate for myself. Like, even in real life, it poured over into my real life and my ability to do things. I built a business, I started a podcast, I started a YouTube, started posting on Instagram, all these things simply because I started posting on TikTok. And there were a couple of comments, but one in particular, these kind of said the same thing, but I answered them. And I ended up doing a video response to another similar comment too. But this person was like, how come big creators don't follow other people when they make it? And it's funny how God is so good, because all of these different topics and videos, they tie into the same message that I'm sharing today. But the person said, how come these, big creators, when they make it, they don't follow other people? And I did do a video where I explained how follow for follow doesn't count, and how really, as much as we talk about followers, especially on TikTok, I tell people once you get to 10K, followers do not matter. They don't matter. You appreciate people being there and hearing from you, but it doesn't matter because you've reached the opportunity to monetize, right? And that's what most people are trying to do. It does not matter how many followers you have, because if your content is good and it gets pushed out, it's going to get pushed past your followers anyway. And all of your followers don't always see all of your content. That's why people can have 100,000 followers and only get 1,000 views on some of their videos, right? So it's not about that. And I was explaining to this person how content creation is this thing where you don't want to do, well, I followed you, so you should follow me, because it's not genuine, right? Because then you're just going to be following this person because you feel obligated to do so, and you're not going to like their content. And then you're both going to be in the same pool where you have a bunch of people following you that don't care about what you have to put out. And so I share that because what I was saying about the landscape of the online space, we're all so full of ourselves, and it's all about ego strokes, and everybody wants to go viral and everybody wants to have the limelight on them. And so even people wanting to get their piece of the pie or whatever, they're doing it for vanity metrics. People are not doing things for the glory of God. People are not doing things to help their brothers and sisters from stumbling. Because one of the primary reasons I started talking about marriage on TikTok is because when I started realizing certain things, I was angered in a way that nobody had ever told me. Like, my heart was broken for all the women who experienced similar things, and maybe they actually left their marriage or they got divorced or it ended up bad for them simply because nobody told them. And so I felt like, man, this is crazy that this is not common sense. It's not things that are taught to us, and these are things that other women need to know. And so I started sharing it. And yes, of course, I started to grow. I sometimes went viral for people picking me apart or like making fun of me or talking down on me or slandering me. One of them, and I said, it's so funny, you don't ever really need to defend yourself, because one of them isn't even online anymore. But I just learned, you don't let people stop the message. You block them and you carry on. But that's a side note. What I'm really trying to get at here is we need to get into seeking God for ourselves. So even seeing a video where somebody's like, hey, that was an example of a testimony. That wasn't a blueprint. When I say I posted every day for a year and these are all the things that happened to me, that doesn't mean you're going to post every day for a year and the same thing is going to happen to you. That was a video to inspire. That wasn't a video to give instruction, right? And even in that video to inspire, if you see something, I started assuming that whatever I see, God may have intended for me to see. I didn't say he did. I said he may have. And so if I see something that moves me in a way or inspires me in a way, I stop and I pause and I think about it. And that's all I'm saying. I think that we have to get to a space of seeking God for ourselves and not always seeking the answers in other people, not always idolizing other people, not always pedestalizing other people. And I know somebody's going to be like, easy for you to say because you have a platform. But I promise you, I'm just a person. I'm a person that has a platform because I just willingly share these things and people can relate to it. But I will not allow people to idolize me. I will not allow people to pedestalize me because I promise you, I'm just a person. I'm just a person who opened my mouth and started sharing things, and I'm not your source for information. I love that people feel comfortable reaching out to me for advice, and that's not what this is about. I love that. I love helping people because I do believe in having wise counsel. As I mentioned a little bit ago in this video, I'm severely disappointed with the information and the output about marriage and relationships that's out there because most of it is very self-seeking, very self-validating, very destructive. Honestly, it causes people to seek relationships for their own selfish gains, and there is going to be some selfish element into a relationship. But when you come into covenant with a man or a woman and now you're married, it's not just about you, it's about service. And not only service, it's about service to God. So a lot of times that's why my content isn't well received by some people too, because they don't know God. If you know God, when I say something that makes you feel uncomfortable, you recognize it as conviction. And a lot of people, for instance, when I say be forgiving of your husband, there's a lot of women that are like, I'm not going to do that. Okay, don't. I'm not talking to you, right? But my point in sharing that is when something is said to you, sometimes it is okay. We have to learn at what point do I say, okay, let me take that to God. I don't need to ask this person another question. Not because the person doesn't want to answer your question, not because I don't want to answer your question, but because when you seek God for yourself, you can't be deceived. So like the lady's comment that I read at the beginning of this episode, when she begins to seek God for herself, she will understand. She will not question, like her husband said, oh, it's of God for me to call you names. When she starts to seek God for herself, she's going to know that that is a lie from the pits of hell. Because when does God call us names? God will call you what you are. You out here committing adultery, he might call you a harlot, right? If you're out here doing whatever the sin is, he's going to say that you're doing the sin. He's going to name the sin. But what I'm saying is God does not call us names to break us down. God does not place shame on us. Shame and embarrassment comes because we know we're doing wrong. And we're supposed to take that shame and embarrassment, turn it into godly sorrow and go to him in prayer. But God does not place shame, shackles, and embarrassment on us. And so we can only know these things when we start to seek him for ourselves. And we can only seek him for ourselves when we take ourselves out of looking up so much to other people. When we take ourselves out of seeking the answers from other people so much, when we take ourselves from a point of, oh, I love this person and they're just going to give me all of life's answers, because now you're idolizing that person and you're pedestalizing that person. You need to take what you're learning from that person and take it back to God to see how it's going to work for your life, right? And I think that that's what I wanted to talk about today. Let this be encouragement for you in anything that you do see and experience, to be very diligent about taking things to God in prayer and recognizing when He's actually telling you to do something and when He's wanting you to see something for the sake of inspiration. So that's all I have for today. I'll see y'all in the next episode.